What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video, and today we've got the best support weapons tier list in Helldivers 2, ranking everything based on the super Helldive difficulty, finally getting around to actually ranking each one of these support weapons, primary weapons, or secondary weapons as well. If you haven't seen those videos, check out the channel. We've got plenty of content coming in for Helldivers 2 and plenty more in the future, so hit that subscribe button. With that being said, let's detail the ranks that we have available to us. I've tried to make it as simple as possible and make it a bit easier to kind of pick out the weapons that are going to be best in slot for you, especially for new players, and which ones are going to be best in slot for either side of the fight. Starting off with the S+, this is going to be for any one of those support weapons that's good against both sides of the fight, is excelling as a support weapon and just giving you the overall bang for your buck. When it comes down to any one of these, you may slot into a loadout. Just under that, we've got the S for the bugs. This is going to be S tier for any of those support weapons that does great against the Terminid, but falls a bit short when it comes to facing off with the automatons. And just underneath that, vice versa, we've got the S for the bots, which is going to be great for the automatons, but will probably fall short when facing off with the Terminid. And just underneath that, we've got the A tier. This is basically going to be for any functioning weapon. It may have some type of ability to it that is worthwhile, but more than likely doesn't excel over some of the other support weapons and just doesn't hit that top tier mark when it comes to the viability of using this support weapon against either side of the fight. And just underneath that, we've got the hot garbage pile, which this is for any one of those support weapons you just don't need to bring in. It's going to be something that more than likely is going to be a huge hindrance to you. And I'm pretty sure there's only 2 support weapons that are going down here. And they definitely both need a little bit of a rework in the coming future, or something to just give them some type of viability. But that being said, let's get straight into it. We've got more than a few things to cover. Coming up first, we've got the anti-material rifle, and we'll be throwing this into the S tier for the bots. Now, you can use this against the Terminid, and it can be effective at trying to pull off some stealth missions if you're trying to pick off some of those bugs from some of those major objectives before moving in and trying to avoid one of those bug breaches. You could possibly get that done with the anti-material rifle at a distance, but overall it ends up falling short in a lot of different instances, considering when facing off with a Terminid, you're more than likely getting overrun by a ton of bugs, and it's just not great at taking out chargers, and there's no real effectiveness of using this up against something like a Bile Titan, which it's more than likely not going to deal any damage, if at all, unless there is some type of exposed weak spot for you to hit, which right now is only going to be that back weak spot, and you'll only be able to hit it from the front towards that shoulder of that exposed back weak spot. But it's a completely different story when facing off with the automatons, as you will have the capability of not only 2-shotting Devastators and 1-shotting any one of those humanoid bots, and the big thing about stealth with the automatons is taking out those humanoid bots, as they're the only ones that have the capability of shooting off a flare and being able to call in some of those bot traps. So having something like the anti-material rifle, if you're that marksman style player, you can add that element of stealth and really benefit the team by being able to scout out some of those humanoid bots, picking those off very effectively from range and stopping some of those patrols, or even some of those moments that you could end up having a flare on some of those major objectives by just swiftly taking out some of those humanoid bots before moving in with the rest of the team. This can be a huge benefit to everybody, but at that same time, the anti-material rifle is doing fantastic at being able to take out hulks as well. You will be able to shoot off their limbs, such as the arms and the legs, but the most effective route is going to be 2-shotting the faceplate on the center of them. That is going to be the most effective route to be able to just crush some of those hulks pretty quickly, but it can be a little bit troublesome to get that hitbox at times. But if you're aiming just above that little red visor, more than likely you'll be able to land those shots, and it should destroy them right after that. Very similar to something like the autocannon. A lot of people will make similarities between this weapon and the autocannon, but this one just ends up having that better sight to it, a little bit less ammunition in the total pool, but giving you the versatility of being able to have that marksman style of play. And also giving you the capability of shooting down those gunships with 3 to 2 shots to any one of the singular engines, as well as giving you the capability of 6-shotting any one of the heavily armored tanks or cannon turrets, as long as you're hitting the back end where that yellow weak spot vent is. Overall, the only downside to using the anti-material rifle is sometimes ammo consumption, so having a supply pack or constantly allowing yourself to drop in those supply drops in order to maintain your overall ammo as you go through the match is something that could benefit you in the long run. But beyond that, it's definitely a force to be reckoned with when facing off with the automatons. And it's a good time if you're looking for some type of sniper build. Coming up right after that, we've got the arc thrower, and this is going to go into the A tier, as they have kind of fluctuated with this one. Back in the day, the original arc thrower was much more powerful. It was able to take down Bile Titans, it was able to take down chargers, it was just mulching through crowds, and with the most recent update, they have affected anything that has that arc damage to it, including the Blitzer, to where now they are starting to arc through enemies and not getting stuck on foliage, as well as being just constantly caught up by striking the dead bodies in front of you. It's more prevalent to actually avoid those dead bodies and go for the living ones, which this does benefit it in the long run, but overall it is still something that feels as though it's falling short when facing off with the Terminid like it used to. It doesn't seem as effective at that crowd control. You could still have some fun with it, but the fact that it's not doing as much damage as it used to when it comes to taking on something like a Charger or even a Bile Titan, it has diminished its overall quality against the Terminid. Now, I will say beforehand, when facing off with the automatons, I actually did end up having a good bit of fun with this. It does stagger any one of the Devastators that are in front of you. It will arc between multiple Devastators, and it actually will be able to take down Hulks in 5 to 6 arcs of this weapon. It used to be able to stagger Hulks, and if it still had that stagger ability against Hulks, this would definitely be an S tier for the bots, as it will also be able to take out heavily armored tanks and cannon turrets by just any direction firing this off from. It may not be the quickest route, but it can get it done. But overall, I'd say I had a really good time using this against the automatons. I was quite surprised by it, and it was a bit refreshing actually pulling this thing back out. And if you haven't tried it recently, or if you just haven't tried it at all, it's one of those that might be worthwhile throwing into one of those loadouts in the coming future to just have fun against the automatons, kind of shake things up. The only downfall to it is the fact that you won't be able to take out gunships. Coming up right after that, we've got our first item going into the hot garbage, which is going to be the Flamethrower. I know a lot of people will be quite shocked by this one, and some people will probably try to make an argument that this belongs in the A tier, as they've supposedly reworked the way that it's interacting with the environment, so it's a little bit better at crowd control. But the reality is this is nowhere near what it used to be, and it's no longer having a very strong capability of actually being able to control crowds. And on top of that, it no longer has even the capability of dealing any damage whatsoever towards the Charger right now, which is crazy. I don't know how they reworked this to the point where damage just doesn't even affect one of the enemies at all. Seems like a pretty big screw up on somebody's part when they're trying to just rework the way that this interacts with the environment, but overall right now the Flamethrower just feels like one of those weapons that if you're coming in with it, you're more than likely going to be a hindrance to your entire team. You're not really going to be controlling crowds, and you're going to be better off just using the Napalm Strike rather than trying to utilize the Flamethrower in order to have some type of crowd control effect with fire itself. Even the Crisper seems to be doing better than the Flamethrower itself. But overall, it seems a little bit better from their initial change with the rework to fire, but it is nowhere near perfect, and it is nowhere near actually being as melting as it used to be. So for right now, as long as this thing doesn't deal damage to Chargers, and it just doesn't have a strong capability of actually dealing damage towards crowds of enemies, I'm just going to put this into the hot garbage until they finally rework it to the point where it's actually a realistically fun weapon to use. And coming up right after that, we've got the grenade launcher. This is a personal favorite of mine. I've loved this since the very beginning of the game. You may have noticed from the channel if you've been here since the beginning. I have made multiple loadouts with the grenade launcher, but this is an S tier for the bugs. You can use it against the automatons, but it does fall short as its medium armor penetration doesn't end up going through the Hulk's visor faceplate. It won't even destroy any one of the emplacements. It has trouble taking out any one of the heavily armored tanks, and even when facing off with Devastators, it's just not doing the greatest job against them. But when it comes to facing off with the Terminid, this thing is clearing through those crowds. You'll be able to lock down those bug breaches, and as long as you pop on with something like a supply pack, you're going to have a good time with this. It's going to be explosive, it's going to be blowing things up, but do keep in mind this thing does have an arming time or a fusing time, so when you fire it, it will need to travel a certain distance or possibly be in the air for a certain amount of time before it has the capability of actually exploding on impact. That's why you'll have moments where if bugs are bum rushing you and you may just fire one off and then it just bounces off their forehead and then sometimes just bounces back at you and explodes. These are the problems that can occur while using the grenade launcher. Now, beyond its crowd control capability, it also is one of the few weapons that now has the strong capability of destroying any one of those Chargers. It will only take 3 grenades from the grenade launcher in order to get up even behind a Charger Behemoth and blow off its back end. And you will be able to get this done by firing it up from the front underneath towards the back legs. The way that you want to be able to take down a Charger as it's charging towards you is you'll need to aim that little white circle towards one of the back legs, and the whole purpose is to try and bounce the grenade to the back leg, or at least have the grenade arc to the back leg to where it explodes right on that back leg, right next to the weak spot on the back, and that's how you can have some of those explosive moments of just being able to completely annihilate some of those chargers as they're bearing down on you, including the Charger Behemoth. On top of that, it does have the capability of taking down Bile Titans, but you will need to use something like the rocket pods or possibly the rail cannon strike in order to blow off the armor on the back side of a Bile Titan, and from that point you'll need to get up in front of it and hit the shoulder of the side of the armor that's been blown off on its backside, and that'll be the quickest route to be able to take those down. Beyond that, it's just an explosive good time. It has a decent blast radius to it, a good bit of damage. You can lock down some of those bug breaches, and as long as you have the supply pack, you'll have plenty of rounds available to you, and pairing this with the Blitzer is an even more deadly force. I'll be making a loadout video on this in the coming future, as it is probably one of the stronger loadouts you can use against the Terminid right now, especially when paired with the Blitzer, and it has strong survivability to it as well. And it rivals that of the new and improved autocannon loadout that seems to be the #1 against the Terminid right now, but we've got plenty of those videos coming in the future, so hit that subscribe button. And one thing I almost forgot to add with this is the bile spewers, both the orange and the green one. You'll be able to take those out in just 2 shots with the grenade launcher. It makes it so much more satisfying. I almost wish there were moments where you could see whether or not that was going to be a prevalent enemy that you'll be facing off with, especially the green variant one that's the medium armor. The grenade launcher takes care of them really easily, and it just makes it a whole lot smoother of an experience. Coming up right after that, we've got the heavy machine gun, the HMG. Now, some people would probably put this in the hot garbage because it has that high recoil to it, and it just isn't something that more than likely is going to be very beneficial for you unless you have a supply backpack with you, and that's why I'm putting it into the A tier. But there is a good bit of fun to be had with this weapon. It's not exactly the perfect weapon, but it's going to be one of those that makes you feel like Rambo. You'll just come in with it, chew through some of those crowds of Devastators, or possibly even try to chew through some of those Hulks if you're able to hit that faceplate, but you will be able to also knock off the legs and arms of Hulks pretty easily if you have a side profile of them while they're chasing down or bearing down on some of your teammates. But the biggest hindrance with the HMG is just its overall accuracy. So if you have something like the peak physique, this can help with the aiming and transitioning of getting from target to target, but I would strongly suggest, especially with facing up with the automatons, if you use the fortified armor that also increases or decreases the overall recoil that you'll have by 30% while crouching or going prone. This can be a huge difference when firing this weapon. Anytime that you'll crouch with it, you'll find that you have so much more accuracy with this, and it is actually a much more viable weapon at that point. Sadly enough, it is one of those moments, though, that does feel like you require some armor or crouching at the same time in order to really maintain and get the most out of this. But when facing off with the Terminid, this is not the case. I would highly suggest using something like Peak Physique, or even not even needing that. It has felt so much more fun to use this as something to just kind of burn through some of those Alpha Commanders that have been coming in. Within 5 shots, if you're landing all of those into the face of that Alpha Commander, you're just blowing that head right off. You're going to be able to clear through some of those crowds. It's also going to be pretty effective at taking out those bile spewers between the orange and the green medium armored variant of that. The biggest drawback to using the HMG when facing off with the Terminid is the fact that it is just not that great at dealing with chargers. I wish, because this had that heavy armor penetration or a higher caliber round firing from this, that we could just kind of like light up one of the legs of the charger and possibly after a certain amount break off the armor and then take out the leg itself with that same magazine from the HMG, but for right now that's just not the capability, and the only way to actually deal damage with this is going to be hitting that back weak spot, which can be a problematic experience. Anytime that you try to get it done, you can blow it off, but it may take some effort. More than likely you're gonna have to throw some stun grenades in there, and at the end of the day, the HMG just ends up being one of those kind of just churn through the crowd type of good time weapons more than it is something of a very effective weapon. Some people may find it more effective against the automatons, others will find it more fun and effective against the Terminid. It's really going to be up to your personal opinion on this one, because it just doesn't fully excel at destroying a majority of the enemies on either side, and it does seem to take a little bit more skill than it actually does have the payoff in order to use this weapon. But the #1 thing that is there is the fun factor of just being able to just lay down some heavy ammunition. Coming up right after that, we've got the laser cannon, which is another one of my personal favorites, especially when facing off with the automatons, and this one is definitely an S tier for the bots. It has the capability of basically destroying every single target you have available to you when facing off with the automatons, but it will fall short when it comes to facing off with the Terminid. It's not the worst weapon, you can use it against the Terminid, but overall it is not going to be the most effective at taking down Chargers or Bile Titans. It does have the capability of dealing damage towards both, and I wish that it did have the capability of similar to what I wanted from the HMG, but having that melting power of sustained fire on one of the Charger's legs, of possibly melting off the armor or just melting through the armor at some point, would be pretty interesting and something I would think would add to the realism of the game that they're trying to implement. Maybe we'll see that in the coming future, but for right now the only way that you're going to deal that damage towards Chargers is hitting that back end, and it is just not very effective, and it is not an easy process to get this done. But it will be able to take down those Brood Commanders, those Alpha Commanders, and a plethora of the different enemy types you'll be facing off with the Terminid fairly easily, and it will be able to have that melting power, along with being able to set those enemies on fire now that the laser weapons are igniting after a certain period of sustained fire. So it's not bad in that instance, but it just excels so much more when facing off with the automatons. And when it comes down to the automatons, this thing is melting any one of those humanoid bots as long as you're just beaming their face, as well as being able to melt through some of those devastators. It's all about pinpoint accuracy though. You will want to just immediately land that shot directly on that weak spot in the center, and within half a second to a full second, depending on your aim, you'll be able to melt through those devastators extremely quickly, and stun grenades are always going to be your best friend at the same time. But with this, you'll have about 200 meters of damage range with this, so you will also be able to line the shots up with this to take out emplacements or even just take out gunships. Gunships actually get destroyed extremely quickly with the laser cannon, and the fact that it has unlimited ammo, you just have to wait on that heat seek to cool down. It is very effective to be able to utilize this to take out large crowds of the gunships, as well as dealing with hulks and heavily armored tanks. With the hulks, you'll more than likely find it a little bit troublesome to try and line up the shot with that visor, that little faceplate on the dead center, but if you can get that shot properly and you don't see that little blue reflective of the ricochet happening, within a few seconds, if not just 1 second in certain instances, you'll be able to melt that Hulk down in no time. And when it comes down to any one of the heavily armored tanks or even the cannon turrets, you'll just need to hit that back end weak spot where that yellow vent is, and you'll be able to melt them in no time from just about any distance with the laser cannon, and it's only going to take about a little under, I believe, half a charge in order to take one of them down. But being able to get that done from 200 meters is pretty effective. It's almost like a sniper in its own way. But the number one thing is just not needing anything on your back, and you'll have the capability of just having that unlimited ammo factor and just being able to pop this out at any time to deal with just about any enemy in front of you with substantial damage on top of that. The laser cannon just comes in handy in so many different situations. It's one of the more versatile options when facing off with the automatons. Coming up right after that, we've got the MG43. Some people may put this into S+, as it does have the capability of being used against both the automatons and the Terminid, and almost has the equal amount of effectiveness against both of them. But I'd almost say that this is a watered-down version of the HMG. The HMG seems to be a much more viable option as compared to the MG43, especially if you're not using the Stalwart. But when it comes down to the MG43, it does have medium armor penetration, so it can deal with devastators. It can chew through that medium armor. It can deal with those bile spewers of the green variant that do have the medium armor. You will be able to chew through some of those Brood Commanders and Alpha Commanders a little bit more easily, and it does have a deep ammo reserve to it as compared to the HMG. But overall, the damage output as compared to the Stalwart is just not enough of a bigger difference, in my opinion, to actually make it much more worthwhile or even put it into the S+ type of tier. And because you still also have to take a knee in order to reload this weapon, and it's basically the same amount of time as the HMG right now, they're almost on par with their reload times. It just seems like one of those type of support weapons that's more for the fun factor, but doesn't have a strong capability at dealing with either side of the fight. You're not necessarily going to be using this to be taking down a Charger or even taking down the Hulks. As with both of them, you'll need to get around to that weak spot and then dump a substantial amount of ammunition into them. And on top of that, you will need to utilize the supply backpack in order to maintain this ammunition over time and over the course of the entire match. I will say that it can be a good time. It's not the worst weapon to use, but overall, it's definitely not one of those top tier options. Coming up right after that, we've got the Railgun, which has been this weapon's basically had its ups and downs, and it's finally back in action yet again against the automatons. This thing is an S tier when facing off with the bots, and even more so now, as the number one thing that was very troublesome previous to some of these updates, which I think everybody agrees the gunships are probably one of the most irritating things to deal with when facing off with the automatons, and before, the railgun just couldn't get the job done, and for whatever reason, it just took way too many shots to take them down. But now, thankfully, it does take 2 to 3 shots to any one of the engines, very similar to the anti-material rifle in order to get it done. It can still be troublesome though, considering the sights on the railgun are just not that great. I wish we had a proper sight similar to the anti-material rifle, or one that we could slot in and out so we can have that close range combat scope, or some type of, I guess, versatile sight that switches between the two. I forget the name of those sights, but that would be pretty handy for something like this, where it had a 3 times with a 1 times. And that would probably go a long way with this weapon. Now, the reason I say it's S tier for bots and not one of those that's S plus for both sides, I know some people are probably enjoying the railgun when facing off with the Terminid, but I feel that it just kind of falls a little bit short. It's not too great. It's one of those that you have to charge up and you'll have to fire a couple of those rounds over at a charger, or even, I think it's like 6 shots at a Bile Titan, and it has to be perfectly landed in the forehead of that Bile Titan, and with the hitbox on that, it's not always going to land. You're going to have it in unsafe mode. It feels a little bit clunky for me when facing off with the Terminid, and that's why I've chose only S tier for the bots. I know some people will probably enjoy it on the other side, and I will give it its benefits when it comes to facing off with the Terminid. You can blow off the back legs of a Charger Behemoth with 2 shots in unsafe mode at the 90% or above charge, but beyond that, it really isn't something that I really have a whole lot of fun using, as it's more effective towards taking down alpha commanders or even the bile spewers, and beyond that, it just eats so much ammo when just trying to take down something like a charger or a Bile Titan. It seems ineffective for me, but you may feel a little bit different. But when it comes to facing off with the automatons, the railgun has always been a banger. This thing is one-shotting Devastators as long as you're hitting them in the chest, and as well as just getting as close as you possibly can to that weak spot in the center. And you will need to do this in unsafe mode, as well as being able to one-tap any one of those hulks. It used to be able to stagger hulks, and I wish they would bring back the stagger, especially in unsafe mode. If I've got this all the way up to 90%, I feel like if I miss the shot against the faceplate of the Charger, it should stagger them for a moment, especially to stop them with that flamethrower or those rockets and lasers if they're bearing down on you or your teammates. That used to be a power play with the railgun, and I really love that effect of it, but for right now, it's still fantastic at the fact that it can be able to one-shot any one of those hulks by just popping them in the face. It's really smooth, it's really quick. The reload is much faster now, especially if you have the ship module upgrades, and the fact that it now 2 to 3 shots those gunships makes it even more viable. It will fall short when it comes to trying to take out any one of the heavily armored tanks or cannon turrets. It'll take far too many shots in those moments, and you're better off using some type of other support weapon from a teammate, or possibly some of your stratagems in order to get that job done. But pretty much every time you should be coming in with Eagle airstrike, so any one of those heavily armored tanks, you should be able to knock them out with that, and then utilize the railgun to eliminate any one of those hulks, or possibly the gunships, and any one of those Devastators. It just makes combat with Devastators a whole lot more entertaining for me, and a lot more immersive, and I love the fact that I'll be able to just one-tap them. There's nothing better than that moment. The railgun almost feels like that lever action rifle that we just didn't get inside of the game, and it's got that kind of run and gun, just kind of pop in one of those rounds, fire off another one, and just start popping each one of those Devastators and hulks at range, and just feeling so satisfied when you get that one-tap capability. It's smooth, it's swift, and it's got high damage, but I wish it had a better scope. Coming up right after that, we've got the worst support weapon in the entire game, the Airburst Rocket Launcher. This thing has not been good since it came out. The leaks for this weapon apparently showcased it as being overpowered, and I guess those leaks ended up getting it underpowered. And when it first came out, the most deadly thing about this thing was the fact that it was just destroying every Helldiver that even fired it anywhere close to foliage or anything. Now it's a little bit better. It will be able to, pop off as soon as it's somewhere near some of those targets instead of foliage, but more than likely you will find a lot of different instances this will still blow up in your face, and when it does blow up in front of enemies, it more than likely won't hit the target, probably 4 times out of 5. It's a little bit frustrating. It's a really long reload to it. It's not very effective. It's not effective at taking down most of the bigger targets as well. Sometimes you can get lucky with firing this underneath a charger or underneath a heavily armored tank to where all the explosives blow up directly underneath it and you hit the weak spot and blow it up in one shot. But that is very far and few between when it actually does occur. It's cool when it happens, but it's not something you can replicate very easily, and overall, you're probably going to be a detriment to your team using this weapon. And the most effective thing about the Airburst rocket launcher is it's supposed to be able to lock down bot drops or bug breaches and just eliminate crowds of enemies. But with the way the RNG works, with how the explosives fan out in the left and right, sometimes it's a little bit too far out, sometimes it just doesn't even hit the enemies altogether. I've had that happen more than a few times where it's literally dancing completely around any one of the enemies that it's exploding next to, or it just explodes just before or just after and completely misses the target. It's one of the most frustrating things. It's one that would only be benefited by the fact of just launching the entire backpack if you had somebody team reloading with you, but let's be honest, nobody's really team reloading in this game, especially considering they have to wear the backpack themselves, which still is another interesting thing that should probably change in the future. But for right now, I'd say there is nobody that could benefit from using the Airburst rocket launcher. This is straight up the most hot garbage item inside of the entire game right now, and I'd say it's probably even less useful than the ballistic shield, which is saying something. All right, coming up right after that, we've got three things to talk about in pretty much rapid succession. Probably, I more than likely won't even have gameplay footage for any one of these, as it's just going to be the same explanation for each one. We've got the QUASAR cannon, which is going to go into the S+, because it's an infinite rocket launcher. You can't go wrong with this. If you use it against either side, it's got the capability of one-shotting the hulks if you hit them in the center faceplate. It's got the capability of blowing up fabricators or bug holes if you shoot them directly with the rocket. It's only got about a 15-second cooldown time before it's available to fire another one. You don't even have to reload it. Just put it on your back, keep moving, and then fire it again. It has the capability of two-shotting a Bile Titan. It has the capability of two-shotting a Charger Behemoth or one-shotting a regular Charger. And the dumb part of the game where velocity comes into the fact where you'll need to walk forward in order to blow off the armor of a Charger Behemoth and then transition to your primary weapon to finish off the Charger. This is how you'll be able to use that. And just behind that, these are the same things that are going to be effective with the EAT 17 and the Recoilless. The Recoilless is basically the QUASAR cannon, but you will have to reload it from your backpack, and the big thing that benefits this is team reloading. If you do utilize team reloading, the Recoilless is better than the QUASAR, and you can fully restock it from any one of the supply packs, especially if you have the superior packing methodology. It becomes a bit of a powerhouse, but since a lot of people don't really utilize the team reloading, and there's other rocket launchers that end up benefiting you a little bit more than the Recoilless, the team reloading ends up being one of those lackluster features towards it, and there's nothing that really changes between this weapon and the QUASAR, and more than likely the QUASAR just ends up being a little bit of the better option and does all the same things. Same thing can be said about the EAT 17, except this is one that you just have a disposable rocket. The one thing to talk about with the EAT 17 is this is one of those support weapons that you can call in very often, pretty much every minute, and if you worked in coordination with one other teammate to where you were both able to carry one of the disposable rockets at a time, where the playstyle is basically one of you has this support weapon and you're basically giving two people a support weapon every time that you call this in, while that other person has the capability of slotting in another stratagem capable of either anti-tank or possibly crowd control instead of having to have a support weapon themselves. That's where the EAT 17 can come into for a different type of playstyle, but yet again, if you're in solo queue just joining in with SOSs, this is something that may not be something you end up having the capability of doing, so you more than likely are going to choose the better option, which is the Commando, which is doing everything that the QUASAR, the Recoilless, and the EAT 17 is doing, except so much better because it is the Lunchbox Supreme right here with 4 rockets available to you. It's still got the capability of two-shotting any one of those Bile Titans. It's got the capability of two-shotting any one of those Chargers, and sadly enough, it will be 2 shots even for the regular Charger, but at this point, with the way that rockets are interacting with the environment, you're better off having a low cooldown 4-piece rocket launcher than you are having even a QUASAR, an EAT 17, or a Recoilless, which is crazy to me. And you will also have the capability of one-shotting a Hulk as long as you're able to hit that center weak spot. The only drawback to this is the simple fact that if you do end up hitting the Hulk in the body instead of the faceplate, it will take 3 total rockets from this in order to take down 1 Hulk. So you can end up wasting rockets in that moment. But because you don't have to have a backpack with this and you've got 4 of them ready available every single time, it's only about 2 minutes 30 seconds before you can have another one called in, and you can call this in for other teammates. it is almost invaluable as a rocket launcher that just ends up kind of making the EAT-17 and the recoilless almost an afterthought completely for anti-tank. And as for right now, before they nerf it in the coming future, which will happen, they have stated this, it will blow up a fabricator from any direction that you actually hit it. You don't need to hit them in the vents. So for right now, this is one of those S+ anti-tank weapons. The Commando has the capability of laser-guided missiles as well, so it makes it a little bit stronger when it comes to taking down gunships. It can still be a little bit troublesome to use it, especially if you forget about the laser guidance and you just immediately fire that rocket and then look elsewhere if you're trying to avoid getting fired upon. That can end up missing the shot right there, but it'll only take one shot as long as you land it on the engine of one of those gunships. And it will be able to take out any one of the heavily armored tanks and cannon turrets with just 2 shots from this, which is a little bit ridiculous considering the recoilless and the EAT-17 will both take 2 shots as well. Another reason that basically the Commando ends up making the EAT-17 and the recoilless a little bit of an obsolete item, especially when you're looking for something of anti-tank when facing off with the automatons and you don't want to use something like the spear. But for these reasons, the Commando is definitely an S+ for the anti-tank. I consider it just underneath the QUASAR, as the QUASAR is just one of those that it's an infinite rocket launcher. It's hard to call it anything less than S+ because it just gets the job done for what it is, and it gets it done in an exemplary way. Now to finish off the entire anti-tank rounds right here, we're going with the next S+ right here, and that's going to the spear. Now some people may disagree. Maybe this is something that's better for the bugs for you. Maybe this is something better for the bots. Maybe you think it's just an A-tier weapon because it can sometimes completely miss the target. Fair enough, but if you know how to use this, the spear is actually an S+. It is great for both sides of the fight. It has target lock on any one of your enemies, and it has substantially more damage than the rest of the anti-tank weapons. It's the only one with the capability of actually one-shotting a Bile Titan. It has the capability of one-shotting the Charger Behemoths, and it can basically take out any target from range. When it comes down to the spore trees, when it comes down to the shrieker nests, it'll only take 1 shot. You can do it from across the map. It is very effective. The only drawback to it is the fact that it just doesn't have a large ammo supply, and it does have a little bit of a lengthy reload to it. And the simple fact that if you're too close to certain targets, the rocket can fire up and straight over their shoulders and completely miss the target altogether, if not having some of those instances where it takes multiple shots towards a Bile Titan or a Charger because it hits the back end of it instead of the head itself, which can be frustrating, but once you do end up being able to line these shots up, it can be extremely powerful. And one thing that does frustrate me is that it does have the capability of one-shotting heavily armored tanks sometimes, but it has to basically land at that back portion towards the weak spot itself. But if it hits towards the front, it won't be able to just one-shot it. And it will also not be able to one-shot the new rocket volley tanks as well, which is another frustrating thing for me. But beyond that, the spear is one of those S+ because it's just ease of use, it's very powerful, and it can be very effective if you know how to use it. And having the capability of taking out fabricators and those shrieker nests as well as spore trees from a distance can be extremely powerful. And overall, there is a good bit of fun factor with it, as there is nothing better than that moment of seeing a Bile Titan in the distance, locking onto that target, and now that it actually does lock onto targets, it's just so satisfying to see that thing crumple, if not completely fly into the air. And coming up right after that, we've got the STALWART, which this one's going to be an S tier for the Terminid. I would not highly suggest using this against the automatons. It still only has light armor penetration on it, but when it comes to facing off with the Terminid, man, this can be an absolute crowd control destroyer. This thing is chewing through the hunters, it's chewing through those smaller bugs, it's even able to chew through brood commanders, alpha commanders. You may burn through a little bit more ammo, but each one of the box magazines for the STALWART has a very deep magazine to that, and it is just feeling so good to just hold down that trigger. And on top of that, having 3 magazines with this, you no longer need to take a knee in order to reload this, similar to the MG43 or the HMG. You'll be able to just, on the move, toss that box and then throw another box on, and just keep churning through those rounds into each one of those crowds of Terminid you may be facing off with. If you haven't used this before, it is a whole lot of fun. The big thing is just having that capability of dispensing a large amount of ammo really quickly into some of those crowds and just chewing through the smaller chaff that you may be facing off with. And also being able to take out some of those shriekers in the sky pretty easily, especially if you've got the peak physique or something that further reduces the overall recoil. You can ramp up the RPM on this one, crouch, and then be able to just become a nice little turret in order to just destroy loads of those Terminid coming out of the ground. And it just feels good. I love it. And if you pair this with something like the supply backpack or maybe even the jump pack, you could have a good time with this one. And all you'll need to do is just supplement with some of those stratagems that have the capability of taking out the Chargers and the Bile Titans, considering this will mostly be effective at just taking out the smaller to medium type enemies that you'll be dealing with. The number one enemy that's more than likely going to be the most troublesome to deal with this weapon if you come into it is going to be the Bile Spewer, the Bloaty Bug with the medium armor green variant. You will need to hit them in the weak spot in order to take them out. But even something like the orange Bile Spewer is going to be very easy to take out with something like the Stalwart. All you'll need to do is just aim for that head and you'll be mulching through them. But overall, the Stalwart gets that S tier rank when it comes to the Terminid because it's just really strong at crowd control. It's really fun and it just has that capability of just giving you a good time. Pair this with Napalm and I guarantee you're going to be locking down every one of those bug breaches. And then just toss in a 500 kg just for the fun. And coming up last, the king of the support weapons, the autocannon. This thing is an absolute S+ right now, especially since the flamethrower got knocked down from being able to take out the Chargers. This one is going to be one of the most versatile stratagems right now that gives you the capability of some decent damage and being able to knock out some of those larger to medium targets a lot quicker than some of the other support weapons. This thing is going to be blowing the face off of those alpha commanders. It has a little bit of crowd control to it, but it's not too strong. I'd say the grenade launcher still has a better option for that crowd control effect with its explosions, but you do have that effect, and as well as being something that can snipe fabricators and bug holes from a distance and closing them up and destroying them, it does end up having some utility factor to it as well. But on top of that, it does have the capability of 3-shotting any one of the Chargers as long as you're hitting them directly in the weak spot. Sometimes it may be even possible to land those shots towards that back leg and be able to bounce that shot into the weak spot. Not always as easy, and it won't be as easy to be able to land those shots and get that effectiveness of the grenade launcher as they're charging down on you. But it's not too hard to basically play a little bit of Olay, allow them to run past you and then turn around, crouch, and then land 3 of those shots successively into that back end, and you should be able to take those Chargers out pretty effectively with this. But sadly, it will fall short when it comes down to Bile Titans, as it will be another one of those moments where, like the grenade launcher, you'll need to blow off that back armor in order to expose that weak spot in order to finish them off with the actual autocannon. So hopefully in the future we may get some more effectiveness of this to be able to penetrate through those Bile Titans, but I believe the Bile Titan will still remain one of those apex predators that requires the highest of some type of heavy armor penetration. Beyond that, it is also effective at taking out the Bile Spewers, much like the grenade launcher. In some cases, it can be one shot every time that you're landing these shots. The only drawback to the autocannon is the simple fact that you will need to take a knee in order to reload it, and it is one of those that requires 2 reloads in order to fully reload itself, and if you haven't completely dispensed all of the ammo, you will find yourself in a situation where you could be reloading one at a time and having an odd amount of ammo within that. So sometimes it's better off to wait for that last round available and then reload, and then fire one more round and then reload again to get that full reload going if you have the time to get that done. But you definitely don't want to fully dispense this, as chambering that next round after reloading twice can fully extend the time frame that you'll need to be on that knee and be ready to fire that next round. And the autocannon does have the capability of being able to take out the Shrieker nests as well as the Spore trees. It will just take quite a few rounds to get this done. I wouldn't say it's the most effective route, but if you have that available in front of you and you don't have any other options, the autocannon can get it done from a distance. And when it comes to facing off with the automatons, it does seem to have much more effectiveness, as this does have the capability of dealing with Devastators quite easily. It doesn't have this maximum stagger power to it, but it will kind of blow them back a little bit whenever you're firing off at any one of those Devastators, and it will be about 2 shots to take out any one of those Devastators, as well as having the capability of 2-shotting any one of the Hulks as long as you're able to hit them in that little red visor, that weak spot in the dead center of their chest. On top of that, you will also be able to blow off their legs and arms with about 5 shots if you wanted to go that route, if you couldn't get that right little hitbox for the red visor in the dead center of that Hulk. I know it can be frustrating from a distance, but it can eliminate them fairly quickly, and I wouldn't waste your rounds on the back weak spot. It's still kind of baffling to me that bent on the back ends up taking more rounds than just the faceplate on the front. Never understand why that's the case, but maybe we'll see something like that change in the future, especially when it comes down to maybe it's just like a hitbox similar to trying to hit the back end of a Charger and sometimes just ending up not getting any damage at all. Beyond that, it's just as effective as the laser cannon or the anti-material rifle at taking down those gunships. It's just going to be 2 shots to any one of the engines and you'll be knocking them out of the sky in no time. It's going to be about 3 shots to any one of the emplacements or even the heavily armored tank or the cannon turrets, as long as you're hitting them in that back weak spot. It's very effective at taking them out really quickly. And to top it all off, if you get underneath one of those factory striders, all you have to do is dump 5 rounds into the belly of that thing and you'll be taking it down in no time. Now, I wouldn't say this is always the best option. You don't want to be running at that factory strider every time you see it, because it will gun you down fairly quickly, especially if it has those miniguns on the front. 9 times out of 10, I'd say you're better off throwing 2 Eagle airstrikes or an Eagle airstrike and an orbital precision strike in order to just rip that thing really quickly from a distance. But if you find yourself somewhere close and you're just underneath that factory strider, the autocannon can get the job done really easily. And as for right now, I'd say probably 90% of the player base is enjoying the autocannon more than just any other support weapon. It's probably the most versatile right now. It's got the most variety and range when it comes down to the enemies it can take out and its utility factor of being able to take out those bug holes and those fabricators. Its damage is just unrivaled, or I guess its utility and versatility is just unrivaled right now by any one of the other support weapons. The railgun used to have its capability, but for right now, the amount of ammunition you have with it, the damage it provides, and every one of the features and capabilities it has versus any one of the enemies you'll be dealing with, it is just excelling above every one of the other support weapons right now. But that's going to be the support weapons tier list right there, the Super Helldive best tier list you've got available in Helldivers 2 right now. Let me know down in the comments below how you feel about some of these placements, what some of your S+ choices are for some of these support weapons, and whether or not you agree with those hot garbage items right down there. If there's any use for the Airburst rocket launcher, let me know, because as for right now, I have seen no use whatsoever that has been actually beneficial to any one of the dives I've ever taken it on, or seen other people utilize it with. It just seems to be something that just either ends up being a waste of time, or just ends up being another Helldiver dropping in by a pod. But also let me know down in the comments below how you're feeling about some of these changes. What would you like to see as some of the changes for certain support weapons on this list? Would you like to see some of them end up being buffed in some way, or possibly even reworked? Give me some of your ideas down below. I know what I'd really love to see is the grenade launcher end up having shrapnel along with it, just to give it a bit more of that crouch control capability, but that's just a personal thought from myself. But if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more of that Helldivers 2 content coming up, and if you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description below. Follow me over at Twitch. We'll be streaming daily. And on that note, have a good one.